Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well, and a special hello to you if you're new. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you've all had a really lovely festive season if you celebrate Christmas and the new year. I myself have had a lovely time. You may have noticed that I've not been super active on YouTube or Twitter recently. I've just been really busy with life stuff, and if I'm honest, I've kind of just been enjoying being busy with life stuff and just focusing on that and not worrying about keeping social media up to date. And so because of that, I now have a ton of books to catch you up on. In this video, I'm going to be telling you about all of the books that I read towards the end of 2019, all of the books that I read in November and December. There are a lot more books to talk about than I usually talk about in a recent reads video, so I'm going to try and talk about these a little quicker than normal. And there is a whole range of books to talk about. I've read some fantasy and some non-fiction and some poetry and some middle grade and some children's classics, and I also read my first ever adult romance novel. So let's just do this. So in November, I participated in Non-Fiction November, which I really love to do each year to get some more non-fiction into my reading life. And the first book that I picked up for that was Talking to My Daughter, A Brief History of Capitalism by Yanis Varoufakis. Written by a world-famous economist as if he was talking to his 10-year-old daughter, this is an introduction to economics and a whistle-stop history of capitalism. I found this book to do what it set out to do very well. I do not know a ton about economics or capitalism. They are not my areas of expertise whatsoever. And this was the plainly laid out, clearly and generously explained account that I hoped it would be. It wasn't my favorite book of all time. Economics isn't something that I love reading about, if I'm honest, but it definitely did teach me some things. And so I'm really glad that I read this one. I would definitely recommend it if you want an introduction to how the economy works, and in the end I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next non-fiction book that I read in November I actually listened to on audiobook, and that was Unfollow by Megan Phelps Roper. This is a memoir that details Megan's childhood and life being brought up in the Westboro Baptist Church, which is an aggressively homophobic, anti-Semitic, rejoicing of natural disasters and AIDS sect in America. In 2012, at the age of 26, Megan left the church behind and her family behind to start a life of her own, and this book details her journey up to this point. So I really enjoyed this book. I found it to be at once very shocking, of course, but also very touching to hear about Megan's childhood. It was especially enlightening and important, I think, to hear about the way in which she was convinced she was acting in not only the right way, but the morally good way. Like Aquinas said, no one pursues evil, right? We don't do evil things because we think they're evil. Hearing about Megan's development and the way in which her mind and beliefs changed was absolutely fascinating. Faith and relationships are unendingly complex, and I think she managed to capture that really well in this book. There was no black or white in here on either side, which I really appreciated. So I would definitely recommend this one if you're fancying reading a new memoir, and in the end I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, for non-fiction November, I read The Uninhabitable Earth, A Story of the Future by David Wallace Wells. This essentially is a book about global warming and climate change, but instead of just talking about what is happening in the world right now, David Wallace Wells takes us into the future to look at what the world will be like for us to live in so many years' time. The message here is that the effects will be all-encompassing. They will affect basically every aspect of human life as we live it today. I found this to be quite powerful, very affecting, and certainly informative. And so if you want to learn more about climate change and the devastating effects it will have on our world, then pick this up. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I picked up was a bit of a change of pace, and that was The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the first book in a fantasy trilogy set in an alternate 18th century Middle East, and it follows a young poor woman called Nari who tends to trick nobles until she accidentally summons a jinn warrior and thus travels to the magical kingdom of Davabad. So in short, I absolutely loved this book. This is the fantasy book I have always wanted. It is now my favorite fantasy book of all time. confirmed. Aside from fantasy, this is also just one of my favorite books of the year, full stop. I absolutely loved my reading experience of it. It was so fun and rewarding and challenging and emotional. I don't want to say much about the actual plot or characters in here because I think it's best to just go into this not knowing much and just let it sweep you up and take you along for the ride. But know that for me, this book was perfect. It had everything that I wanted. The world here is one of the most rich and complex I have ever read about. The history and the different tribes and the different languages are so vast and realistically complex. It discusses politics and faith. The setting is absolutely gorgeous. It's vivid and enchanting, and it's like you can see it shimmering in the heat. And the characters in here are brilliant as well. The three main characters were so fantastic. I loved them all, and even the side characters were so great, so well developed. I was here for them all. I will be talking about this book in my favourite books of the year video, so if you want more coherent and probably helpful thoughts, then wait for that video, but rest assured that this one got 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I picked up was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling. If you didn't already know, I was rereading the Harry Potter series last year. It was the best. I know there has been a lot of talk on social media about J.K. Rowling recently, and I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that. I do not condone any of her behaviour. I disagree with her in many, many ways. I'm trying to come to peace with that myself and just enjoy rereading these books, aside from agreeing or disagreeing with J.K. Rowling as a person. So I finished The Half-Blood Prince, which was great. It's actually one of my favourite books in the series, tied with The Prisoner of Azkaban. There's not much to say about this one. I really enjoyed listening to it, of course, and I gave it 5 stars. Going into December, the next book that I picked up was Frosthearts by Jamie Littler. This is a middle grade adventure novel that I actually buddy read with a couple of fellow editors at work, and we all really enjoyed this book. I mean, it's basically children's publishing goals. Look at this cover. So gorgeous. This book follows a young boy called Ash who lives in a community in the middle of nowhere that is surrounded by the Snow Sea, which is infested with monsters. Ash lives under the guardianship of a grumpy yeti called Tobu, but one day when a crew comes and visits the village on a sled, Ash sets out with them to go and find his parents. This is a perfect wintry novel. The snowy setting is absolutely gorgeous, as are the strongholds where the characters live and their sleds and their clothes, all of which you can see through accompanying illustrations. There is magic in here which is performed through singing, which is lovely. There is a great sense of adventure that runs throughout the book, and I really enjoyed all of the characters. I found myself really rooting for them all. There is such a fun, eclectic mix of characters in here. They're all so great. They all have such distinct personalities, and I really enjoyed getting to know them. I found this book to be surprisingly humorous as well. Quite a lot of the dialogue is really pretty funny. I will say that the second half of the book let me down slightly. I was so here for this book at the beginning. This was promising a 5-star read for me, and it didn't quite hold up, but I have high hopes for the rest of the series when it comes out. So in the end, I gave Frostheart 4 stars. The next book that I read in December was a big one, and that was The Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the sequel to The City of Brass. I started it basically as soon as I finished The City of Brass, and it did not disappoint me at all. I won't tell you anything about the plot in this one because I do not want to spoil anyone, but just know that it was incredible and it stepped up in every way that you would hope a sequel would. You get to know the characters more, there's more politics, you get to learn more about the world, you get to meet more side characters, and everything just generally becomes more fleshed out. I cannot overstate how gorgeously intricate this series is. It's absolutely phenomenal, and I'm so excited for the final book to come out in summer. I have such high hopes for it, and I'm really hoping that it lives up because I am massively invested in this series now. Naturally, I gave this one 5 stars. stars. The next book that I picked up in December was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This is a children's classic that I just hadn't read yet, and I always enjoy reading a children's classic around Christmas time, so I thought I would pick this one up. This follows a fiery, imaginative young girl called Anne Shirley who leaves her orphanage in Canada to go and live in a countryside farmhouse with the Cuthberts. We've obviously been hearing a lot about Anne of Green Gables recently because of Anne with an E, the popular Netflix series, which I'm really excited to watch. I feel like I can watch it now I've read this book, and I think I'm really going to enjoy it. And I did enjoy this book. Anne is a very witty character. I really enjoyed hearing about all of the different scrapes that she gets into throughout the book, and her relationships with various characters throughout was another highlight. I have to say I didn't love this book as much as I thought I would. I didn't find myself to be massively invested in Anne's story. And if I'm honest, I actually found her voice to be quite unbelievable and even grating at times. So overall, I enjoyed my reading experience of this book, but it certainly wasn't my favourite children's classic ever, and I actually think I'm going to enjoy the TV series more than this, so I'm excited to get into it. In the end, I gave Anne of Green Gables 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I picked up was my first ever adult romance novel, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and that was Coming Home for Christmas by Rayanne Tyne. So I've been intrigued to try out a romance novel for quite a while now, and I thought, what better time than at Christmas when I'm feeling all cozy and festive and romantic. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone on Twitter who recommended me Christmassy romance books when I called for them. Thank you all so much, especially Claire from Claire Reads Books, who is lovely and sent me a really nice message with a ton of recommendations. So this book follows a woman who is suffering from postpartum depression and grief when she gets into a car accident and her memories are taken away and she is separated from her husband and 2 children. In this novel, 7 years later, she is reunited with her husband and they try and see if all of the hurt can be healed. So I was so ready to love this novel. I cannot tell you how ready I was for this book, but unfortunately, I just didn't like it at all. If I'm being blunt, I actually thought this was a pretty shit book. The characters were frustratingly one-dimensional and the plot was the most predictable thing I've read about probably ever. The romance wasn't exciting to me and the children were frankly ridiculous. Their dialogue was like some middle-aged man was speaking. We don't need to dwell on this one, it didn't do it for me, but I do realise that this cannot be representative of the genre as a whole, and so I will try another romance book at some point. So in the end, I gave Coming Home for Christmas 2 stars. Next, I finished my series reread of Harry Potter, of course finishing with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I always enjoy rereading this one in particular because I certainly haven't read it as many times as I've read the ones earlier in the series, so this was really nice. I loved it, it gave me all of the feelings that I knew it would. It was epic. So of course, unsurprisingly, I gave this one 5 stars. The next book that I read in December was a poetry collection, and that one was Kingdom Land by Rachel Allen. I always enjoy having a poetry collection on the go when I go home for Christmas because they are the best things to just dip in and out of whenever I fancy it. And this is the one that I picked this year. It is a contemporary poetry collection that feels quite fantastical. There's surreal imagery and violence and a lot of animal imagery, but throughout all of this, it also speaks to very real everyday occurrences. This poetry collection definitely had a very eerie feel to it. You know when something feels really familiar, but it's slightly off, and that feels super weird. I found a couple of the poems in here to be really beautiful and really haunting, and generally I just really enjoyed the imagery that was being evoked. But unfortunately, I didn't massively connect to the poems in here. It didn't hit me emotionally, and it didn't necessarily inspire me in a thought-provoking way. So in the end, this was enjoyable. I enjoyed reading the collection and I enjoyed her style, and I definitely read more by her, but it didn't necessarily impact me in the way I hoped it would. I gave Kingdom Land 3 3 stars. The next book that I read I don't have here with me because it is my sister's, and that is Once by Maurice Gleitzman. So this is one of my sister's favourite ever books. She first read it when she was around 12 and it's very special to her, so I thought it was about time that I picked it up for myself. This follows a young Jewish boy named Felix who is in Poland during World War II when he flees his orphanage to go and find his parents and save them from the Nazis. On his adventure he meets a young girl called Zelda whom he takes under his wing, and the 2 young children go on their journeys together. I read this book in one day over Christmas. As it is a children's book, it is super short, super quick and super easy to get through, and this book really packed a punch. I found myself to be so much more affected and impressed by it than I thought it would be. I found it to be very well done. The characters were charming. I found their dialogue to be really spot on, really believable. The subject matter was naturally very emotional, and I just think the whole thing was handled both really tenderly and really powerfully. So I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for some children's fiction, or if you're just wanting something set in this time period, then definitely give it a go. And in the end I gave this one 4.5 stars. And the final book that I finished in 2019 was A Poem for Every Night of the Year, edited by Ali Asirai. So this is a very big book that I've been reading all year long, and it does what it says on the tin. It includes 365 poems, one for every night of the year. There are a great mix of poems and poets throughout this book. There are poems written hundreds of years apart, of varying structures and tones and lengths. There are super famous poets featured in here and much lesser known ones as well. I have to say that I didn't quite enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed its companion novel, A Poem for Every Day of the Year, which I enjoyed last year. I'm not sure whether this was because the actual poems were worse in this book because this collection was brought about second, or whether the novelty had just worn off a little bit for me. I suspect it might be a little bit of both. But either way, I love this book. I think it is such a great idea and it is absolutely beautiful. I found some new poems and poets through reading this book that I now really love, so that's pretty cool. And so in the end I gave this one 3.5 stars. And so there we go. Those are all the books that I read in November and December of last year, and now you are all caught up on my reading from 2019. I would love to hear what you were reading at the end of last year. I'd really love to be caught up on what you guys have been up to and reading. I feel a little bit out of the loop. And I know this is the time of the year when everyone is doing their videos on their favourite and worst books of the year. Rest assured that I'm doing those videos soon. I think my next video will be my worst books of the year, and the one after that will be my favourites. So if you're interested in those, then just wait, they're coming soon. Once again, I hope you're all doing really, really well. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of you down below in the comments. Please say hi if you're new. I would love to meet you, and I will see you really soon with my next video. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye.